Welcome to the ASQ Innovation Technical Community webinar for April 2022. Tonight we present to you Mr. Andrew Sherwood, Strategic Decision Points for Corporate Innovation. Our wonderful speaker tonight serves as the second vice president of the Innovation Lab with Boston Mutual Life Insurance, as well as a director of MBA with Midland University and as an independent consultant. Andrew's role is to implement and lead the company's innovation lab, which focuses on generating and experimenting with opportunities to drive the organization forward. In his role at Midland University, he's responsible for all academic oversight for the program, as well as serving as a professor for classes on project management, consulting, business process methodologies, and project management certifications. He has an extensive background presenting in many industry events, conferences, etc., and also presents at monthly meetings and professional development, especially around Agile L&K. Prior to working with Boston Mutual, Andrew worked with Mutual of Omaha as a servant leader to a large software development team that produces software to support the administration of Mutual of Omaha's diverse product lineup. You can see that he is a multifaceted leader and professional and innovation strategist. So tonight, please welcome Andrew for his discussion. His fun fact tonight is that he is incredible at the claw machine game, which he will pull the thread on in just a moment. So Andrew, we are going to pass the ball right over to you.
Sounds good. Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, I believe everyone should now see a PowerPoint. Okay.
Perfect.
Thank you, and you can still see me as well, I presume, correct? All right, so this background is what was just described to you, so I'm not going to go through a lot of that again. The kind of highlight is the project innovation space is where I've spent the majority of my career. It's also mostly been in the insurance industry. So I like to work with really creative products in the innovations in the insurance space, as well as some of that operational support. So, excuse me, most of my career has been in some way related to those aspects. The more fun thing, we're at an evening, the day is over, let's make this a little more fun. She said, my fun fact, I had a hard time deciding. I've got two Guinness Book of World Records that not actually confirmed. In my head, they're Guinness Book of World Records. So I have two of them that are kind of off the wall, and I couldn't decide between the two of them. So I actually included both of them in my slides here. The first one she mentioned, I am incredible at the claw machine, and I'm not even gonna be like humble about it. You put me in a sports bar with about $5 and I'm getting a bunch of stuffed animals and making kids everywhere happy. My unofficial Guinness Book of World Records is that I went 9 out of 10. It should have been 10 out of 10, but it was 9 out of 10, and you can see the joy on my kids' faces, because quite frankly, as a grown-up, I don't really care about stuffed animals. It's the joy of the hunt. So I'm incredible at the claw machine, which has nothing to do with at all with tonight's session, but I was told to do something fun. So that's the thing you won't see on my professional resume or any of my background material. But I couldn't decide between this one and the other unofficial Guinness Book of World Record that I have. I'm probably the most out of shape person ever to have completed multiple marathons. The look that you see on that face is of a broken man who has now crossed 26.2 miles, but it took him 6 hours, which is the length of time before they start closing down marathons. So I have completed about 4 of them, and twice where they were about to pick up the cones, and I was about the last one, but I got it done. So for those who think they can't do it, you probably can, because I'm an out of shape, short, squatty man, and I made it happen multiple times. So those are my fun facts. I hope they are as fun as the rest of the content. Okay, so a little bit of context to try to help level set the organization that I work with. I mentioned that I work with the extremely exciting, maybe that's with an asterisk, I suppose, insurance space. And the organization that I work with, I want to talk about this a little bit because there's a lot of things here that are probably more likely when we think about innovation that align with your company than the tech startups or the cutting edge technology, those types of things that come to mind with innovation, right? We think of things like PayPal and AI and the Internet of Things. All those things, when we think of innovation, those things jump to mind. But that's not where most of us work. That's not what most of us do for a living. That's not the space that most of us work with. We're not all in Silicon Valley, and we're not like, it's not the majority of the population. So that doesn't mean, though, innovation types of activities aren't for you. In fact, the screen that you're seeing now, there's a lot of subtext here that makes you think this is probably not a good case study for an innovative company. So my organization, Boston Mutual, great organization, and I love being a part of it. We are pretty old, 128 years providing peace of mind. That's 128 years of being a mutually owned insurance company, meaning we've been successful for a long time. And if you've been successful for a very long time, it's really easy to get into a stagnation mode. The other part that you may not recognize here is the mutual aspect. I don't have a tile for that on my slides, but we're a mutually owned company. So that means we don't have private equity bigwigs that are calling every day asking for a return, or we don't have like stockholders that are wanting to really drive changes every quarterly earning calls or any of those things. Our drivers are our policyholders, and quite frankly, as long as we can pay out their loved ones when they die, that's really what they're concerned with. So we don't have these huge driving forces to be some top flight, innovative type of incubator. We're not Lemonade. Some insurance companies like to think they're a technology company that delivers insurance. We're the other way around. We are admittedly and proudly an insurance company, and we try to use technology and innovation to deliver a better product. The other part you might not call out there, 1.3 million policies, so you might think, wow, that's a big company. In the insurance space, it's not really. We're supported by about 300 employees, just under, and for scale, if you will. My prior company, Mutual of Omaha, is an example just because I know some of their stats off the top of my head, has about 6,000 people. So literally, we're talking about an economy of scale difference of 200x. So we're talking about a pretty big difference. Boston Mutual is not a lot. So to frame up the why does this slide matter, Boston Mutual is an old company that's successful, that doesn't have stockholders to answer to, and that's not very big. And if you put those four ingredients together, you probably don't have innovation just jump off the page. But you probably can see some of those ingredients and say, you know what, that's about like what the ingredients I'm working with in my organization, which really is the heart of this context. I want to try to provide some good decision points in the event that your organization is looking to stand up some sort of innovation group, because I went through that recently. So I started as the innovation leader for Boston Mutual in November of 2020. I left my job at Mutual of Omaha, and I was recruited to start this sort of innovation lab. And really, the innovation lab just existed on a one-page sheet of paper that kind of described what maybe it should look like. So I got a lot of creative liberty in how this was founded, and that was amazing. It was such a great experience to be able to build a thing from scratch. The problem was that I answered a lot of these very important questions about how the things should be solved without really knowing it. I don't know if I'm the only one on this call that's done this before, but I made a lot of decisions without truly understanding the alternatives and without truly understanding what the strategy implications were. I even made a bunch of decisions that were pretty mutually exclusive without even recognizing it. So as the Innovation Lab was formed, over the first handful of months into the first year, I started realizing that I was making some decisions without understanding all of the context. So I did what any humble person would do and started talking to people smarter than me. And I'll be honest that it's not hard for me to do. There's a lot of people around that have learned things better than me. So what I'm doing today and presenting today is not about Andrew's an expert, Andrew did winning. I'm going to tell you that I struggled, and here are the things I learned from people smarter than me, and try to give a summary of those decision points. That's the takeaway for you today. That's the hope. So when I needed to talk to people smarter than me, I went to the interwebs, and I created a user group called Omaha Innovates. And through Omaha Innovates, I just scoured LinkedIn and recruited people that worked in similar contexts to me in the innovation space. So they were some level of leadership with something innovation in their title, and they were geographically located to me. Which that last part probably didn't matter since it was COVID and we did everything remotely anyway. So I recruited the innovation leaders for a lot of different organizations to say, hey, let's have a think tank or a meetup or whatever term you want to call it, some sort of professional network where we figure out some of these topics. And as I started talking through the topics and the things I was concerned with, I quickly understood I was not alone in my position where we were making decisions without actually understanding the mutually exclusive aspect to it. We were making decisions without understanding what the strategy impact was to it. So to try to rectify that, not necessarily that any of these decisions have a right or wrong, but we started to catalog what they were. And that's really the crux of what I want to talk about today. So these 6 groups got together. Some of these are, I know ASQ is more of an international type of organization, so some of these companies may not ring a bell, but they are larger in the Omaha area. So Peter Hewitt's Fortune 500 International, OPPD is our large metropolitan service for electricity, so very large to serve this area. First National Bank of Omaha is the largest privately owned bank in America. Boston Mutual, I already told you, my tiny little company. Farm Credit Services is quite an innovator in the agricultural lending space and located in Omaha, and Werner Enterprises is one of the biggest logistics and trucking operations in America. So these organizations all have people that do what I do, but they do it better. So I talked to them and I said, how do you decide these certain things? And we all realized that there was a handful of decision points that whether we knew it or not, we were making decisions on. So we collectively decided to present what our output was on those decisions. And today's conversation is a lot about the pros and cons of those as well as what they are. So to begin with, just what these things are. When you're forming an innovation group in a corporate structure, there's a few things that are more, not necessarily on a spectrum, they're more about definition, if you will. And the definition for some of these things drives then how you ultimately go execute them. So I was smart in that I came out with a mission first and was able to drive a lot of decisions off of that. But I did have quite a few peers that did not. They had maybe some sort of mini elevator pitch, or they had like an idea, but nothing that was truly concrete or thought through. So the first thing is, what's the mission for the innovation lab or your innovation program that you want to stand up? And I say that while it may sound, it may not be very, like that may not be very profound. The other part of the mission is what you're not doing and the things that you're not writing down. So getting that right and having that articulated pretty well so that you can tie work that aligns with it is certainly important. Other categories were a little bit less so, but certainly applicable. How do you measure innovation? It's such a nebulous concept. How do we measure how innovative things are? And everyone kind of landed in different spots. What about budgeting? How do you budget for innovation? Because we all know that if you want to try to do something innovative, you have to be able to take a risk. So it's not like a traditional operations area where you can just regularly measure improvements. And so how do you budget for that? Is it a standing budget, or is it a per project budget that you try to get approval for? How does budgeting work with something weird like innovation? It's just not as budget friendly as some other operation areas. Big question is, where in the organization does this innovation group live? Sometimes it's operations, sometimes it's technology, sometimes it's its own line item. I don't know. It depends on kind of what the focus is. You can see how mission drives a lot of these next things. But when we're talking about decision points, here are definitely 4 categories that you want to be able to articulate as you're standing up any sort of innovation group. There are some others that maybe aren't as much definition as they are like spectrum. Like there's somewhere on the spectrum of minimum and maximum. So your innovation group, how much oversight is there? Like, are we going to be reporting? Is there going to be constant ELT watch over what we're doing? Or do we have autonomy to go figure stuff out and experiment and try stuff and do all the stuff that's supposed to be part of innovation, right? Do we have that autonomy? Where on the spectrum do you land? Because there's pros and cons to both. It's not about right or wrong. It's about where do you think you should land on that. Or how about strategy? This is a really fun one for the organization. Does your innovation group go out and find things that influences the strategy for the organization and causes the organization to fundamentally shift who they are and what we're trying to accomplish? Or does an executive type of decision be made about strategy and then use the innovation lab to try to execute that? Those are very different directions. It's a very different ends of the spectrum. And it's hard to set up an innovation type of program without understanding which one of those should you be. Which one of those are you trying to accomplish? Are you trying to set the strategy for the organization, or are you trying to use innovation as a way to execute the strategy that's set somewhere else? So that's certainly a spectrum. Where do you land on that? And the answers for all of us on all of these things were different. How about innovation when you think of what it is? It's making something new, taking a new approach, new products, etc. So it's all those things. So are we talking about doing big new things? Like, are we buying out tech startups? Are we investing? Are we Elon Musking and we're buying Twitter? Or are we just figuring out new ways to kind of improve a process? Is it continuous improvement, or is it big new things? Like your innovation lab, and you can understand your innovation group, whatever the titling is, your innovation group. If you don't pick a spot on that spectrum for any of these things, you're going to have some identity crisis, and that identity crisis is going to lead to not being able to execute. So we collectively came up with these as categories. That group, that innovation meetup group that I came up with, that we formed. So we had these kind of 6 categories. I just want to make sure I call them out good. We're talking about mission, metrics, budget, where in the organization, and then on a range. How much autonomy versus oversight? How much are you a strategy driver versus strategy enabler? Are you for about continuous improvement or big new things? And so here's where we pivot a little bit and we kind of focus where on Boston Mutual landed for all of these, and more importantly, the pros and cons. Because it's not about whether Boston Mutual made the right decision. In fact, we probably don't have the right decision compared to your organization. But it's understanding the ramifications of the decision, or in the case that a lot of us had, a lack of decision. So for Boston Mutual, when we looked at something like team mission, and the mission really to drive all of the actions, they should all align to this hierarchical type of marching order. And for Boston Mutual, I spent a lot of time taking my favorite buzzwords and business jargon and mooshing them together. Okay, well, it wasn't quite that way. I did put a lot of thought into it. There is intentionality into my mission statement for Boston Mutual, and it took me a lot of time to craft and has been revised a little bit. But there's a couple of keywords here that you'll see subsequent strategy types of decisions on that spectrum, how they played out because of what we started with the mission. So from a mission perspective, our innovation lab is a venue and a mechanism. I'll pause there for a second. It's a place. By a venue, I mean you can go to it. You can go to our office in Omaha now that the pandemic's over. You can go to our office in Omaha and you can see it. You can touch it. You can feel it. You can look at our whiteboards. You can see our shared screens. You can see our applications in the wall. You can see it. So there's a place where it happens. And this is really a decision point because the alternatives, start thinking of the alternatives. Does innovation live somewhere, or is it culturally spread? And you'd approach those differently. And I chose the living somewhere place by design. So I want to get people out of their work, and I want to bring them to focus in this innovation lab on the thing that we're trying to improve. I want to bring my SMEs in from Boston. I want to bring my SMEs in from underwriting, from claims, from the ELT, from marketing, etc., and get them to turn their laptops off and just focus on what we're working on at the time. So I very intentionally said it's a venue, not a culture that gets spread. and those are mutually exclusive decisions. It's a mechanism. So innovation has some repeatable processes. Yes, it's whiteboard by nature, but there are decision points that you can do and approaches you can take and things like job to be done and different strategies where you can apply innovation. And we set out to say we're going to have some level of repeatability in how we approach these things, and we're going to create a mechanism. So it's a place and it's a thing. That's really the first sentence. Our idea is that we want to support and advance the organization through the discovery, creation, and adoption of opportunities. That's another big one where you start to look at some of those strategy decision makers. And when I say through the discovery, creation, and adoption, that means I'm going to find things. So the Innovation Lab, the way it was designed for Boston Mutual, has autonomy to find opportunities. And the superhero quote that I love is, with great power comes great responsibility. We have to understand what's important for the organization, but ultimately, we go find those opportunities and bring them back, which is very different from ELT or SLT or some sort of leadership body says, hey, we need a new way to do this thing. Innovation people go figure that out. Those are different angles. And of those two options, we chose the one for autonomy so that we're not bogged down in a lot of the day-to-day. And we did that because we found a lot of the directive things that were coming into us were very much about changing the current state process, very incremental. So we embrace an experimental approach, meaning my father was a science teacher, and he retires this year after 44 years. But living in the same house as a science teacher, the thing you understand very quickly as an adolescent is the concept of the scientific method. And as much as it pains me to admit to him that there is validity in this concept, I now as a grown-up have adopted it with our work. And by that, I mean the experimental process we're creating a hypothesis, we're reducing the variables, we're testing the variables, measuring the outcome, and repeat. We take that experimental approach to a lot of the different solution sets that we bring up. So we take that experimental approach, and experiments mean sometimes they don't work. In fact, a lot of times they don't work. But we take that approach to the research and development of solutions, incremental improvements. My team is very big on taking an agile approach, so we want to deliver incrementally. And here's the fun line that will scare a lot of people at a 121-year-old mutually owned insurance company. I want to be intentionally disruptive. I want to be intentionally disruptive changes for complex businesses. I want to do things that have some level of big. And that's a lot harder than the incremental changes. So the importance here, and I know I spent a bunch of time on a mission statement, the importance here, though, can't really be minimized. When you think about all of these other strategic decisions that we've brought up, that I've pointed out, they all kind of drive from this. You want to stay in alignment. And why I said I had several revisions of this, I didn't recognize how important it was to have that alignment. In fact, I have 3 or 4 different versions of this mission statement that kind of say different things because I chose my words poorly. So it all starts with crafting what you want to accomplish and starting to embed some of those directions in it. So yes, I understand mission statement may be kind of pish-posh for some people or not really embraced, but for me and my peers, this was a really good way to understand directionally what some of these other decisions are. So it all started here for me. I was crafting what I want it to be in a couple of sentences that I can then go start to drive those other decisions. So it started with that mission statement. That mission statement, if you get one level down, like one more level of granularity, starts to talk about the scope that we're looking at. And some of these I already touched on some, so I'll be a little bit quicker here with this slide. But what's in scope for the innovation? Some innovation programs are about new products, some are process improvement, etc. Some are technology only, some are early exploration only that somebody else goes and implements. So understanding that scope aspect as part of like the next level of granularity from your mission is really a good place to start next. So for my team, we decided we're going to do process and technology. I think everyone on this call has been involved in some sort of project that looked at one instead of the other or one or the other and has realized that really good technology with a cruddy process is cruddy. Cruddy technology with a really good process is cruddy. Like the equation is kind of like multiplying by 0. It doesn't matter what the other one is. Your timesing it by 0 is going to be 0. So we wanted to embrace both process and technology. The third bullet was very important to me as a mutually owned insurance company, was to establish that we're talking about near-term commercially viable market opportunities. And that's a really eloquent, maybe, I'm not usually eloquent. That's my attempt at being eloquent and saying I'm not going to do bleeding edge things. I'm not going to make some hologram insurance agent, right? We're not, as an organization, positioned to do that type of stuff. So what I have to look at is what can I be from fast follower perspective. And I wanted to establish that up front so my stakeholders didn't think I was going to all of a sudden do some crazy technology. Next bullet's about the idea that we take these things to completion. So that end user configuration and onboarding, I want our stuff to be able to be owned by us from soup to nuts, beginning to end. And the last couple of bullets are that we own our backlog. So we have that autonomy piece I was talking about as a decision point. And hopefully what you start to see is an alignment between what the strategy is versus, as we get to a more narrow scope, what that looks like. All right, so that was big picture. We established the scope, we established the mission, and then when I talked to peers, they did very similar things, except they made different decision points, and ultimately led them down different paths of how some of these subsequent strategy things were decided. So the next really big bubble to solve is how do you even know if you're successful? Innovation is kind of a vague thing. It's hard to measure. It's not like a call center where you can pull some stats and you're like, oh good, our call handle time went down, and there's just really known metrics. It's a little bit more complex. And metrics are important because it's how we measure success. And this ASQ group, this is the audience that knows that best, right? We improve what we measure. So if we don't measure it, how do we really do that? But the thing we're trying to measure is really nebulous. So how do you measure that? These aren't right or wrong, but for the way we look at it for my team, I want to measure our team's ability to be predictable. So as I mentioned, my team operates in an agile environment. I am a big fan of Scrum, and so we utilize that framework as a way to break down our work in towards incremental deliveries, but more importantly, so that we can plan within a time box. So one of the key things that's important for me is how predictable we are related to our velocity. It's not about a pure number. It's about how much did we say we were going to do versus how much did we end up doing. That percent of predictability is important for us. So we actually operate on weekly sprints. Monday morning, we plan our week. Thursday afternoon, we do 4 long days. I love it. So I'm almost done for the week. How fun is that? And then Thursday afternoon, we do our sprint review, where we talk to stakeholders about the work that we discovered throughout the week, what was implemented, what's still open, etc. But the key thing there is I want to know at the beginning of the week what the end of the week looks like. And I know a lot of my innovation peers say they don't want to do that. And I recognize it because I would not do that for a long-term period. So I'm specifically only okay with this as a metric because we're looking at just 4 days. And I don't think anyone should have so much variability in their work that they can't figure out just a decent understanding of what work they should do in the next 4 days. So that's a big aspect for me, is tracking velocity as a percentage of work done. And that forces behavior for us to try to make sure we don't go explore things into perpetuity. And before we pick up and spend our valuable time, we have somewhat of an understanding of what we're trying to accomplish. So for us, this was a very important metric in a way that we could try to put some objectivity into measuring our results, as well as to drive behavior, because that's really what metrics are about. So the behavior we drove here is, over the short term, let's kind of have a decent plan of what we're trying to accomplish. Some people want to go a little more anarchy in their innovation program, and some of my peers were that way. I think part of it's because they didn't want to hold themselves responsible to any metrics, but that's neither here nor there. You can start to see some pros and cons, though. If I'm going to measure how much work we get done in a week, we lose some of that ability for open-ended, just discovery type of activities, because you can't just take something into perpetuity. We want to know at the end of the week what it's going to look like. So not a good or a bad, but that's how we decided to frame that up. The other aspect, as part of breaking down that work, is the concept of cycle time. And so this is how long does it take from the time you start a piece of work to the time you're done with it. And this is really a measure of WIP. I want my team to focus to finish. So I want my team to be working on a thing, and I want it to be broken down small enough, in a small enough unit of work that it can be completed in a day. And we do usually hit that pretty well. Normally we're at about a day. So the idea being almost like the last metric, but even more granular. Can you tell me what you're going to accomplish today? And that creates our kind of autonomy of ownership there. So cycle time is another measurement that we do. And here's a fun one. I do business value points. And this is a relative number. Similar to story points with how you saw for the velocity, I use a business value point in a similar way. So when we start a project, I say, how big would this be if we could do this? Would it be this big or this big? And it's not that 1 equals a certain dollar amount or a 2 equals a certain dollar amount. It's a value that's proportional. Like, I don't know how valuable this pen is, or I don't know how big this pen is, but I know it's about 1/5 the size of this water. So if a pen is 1, water is 5. And the same is true for some of the processes and projects that we do. If understanding how to stop printing that cover sheet before we send something to scanning because we can do an indexed barcode, that sounds like about a 2 in comparison to, let's just eliminate needing to send it to scanning, and all of those things can go through a PDF upload process. Like, you see how one's little, I eliminated 1 page. I don't know, I could probably run some numbers, but essentially what we're doing is we're giving ourselves business value metrics, and we just line things up. How much better is this than that? So we create that metric, and we try to capture it over a running year. So business value metrics. And that's a way you can take something that's incredibly subjective, like innovation, and try to create some measure of objectivity to it. We do also track annualized dollars saved. That's a little bit more of a hard number that certainly is in alignment with the types of things ASQ does. And then it's the types of calculations you would expect. The old process took this long. We did it this many times by this many people. And the new way is this many times by this many people. What's the difference? Like, I'm going to capture that. I'm not a huge fan of it, but that is the hard dollar style savings cost that we try to capture. So those are the metrics that we decided to measure, that we decided to utilize. Other ones that I've heard from were a little bit different. Sometimes they would do like a hit ratio. So how many things did we experiment that were successful? What I don't like about that one is it encourages you to only pick up things that are going to be more likely to be successful, because we measure what matters and that drives behavior. So if I want to make sure 40% of my things work, I'm probably going to make sure that if I had 2 failures, my next one's going to be a thing that's a home run. And so maybe I didn't pick up the biggest, coolest, best option thing. I was driven behavior-wise to pick up something that I knew would be fun. Here's kind of how we trend our velocity chart, and this is, again, a measure of predictability. So it's a comparison of how many things we said we were going to do versus how much did we end up doing. Many people on this call probably recognize this potentially divisive tool of Jira. I think if you use it in a non-bastardized way, it can be a pretty good tool. So we use Jira to measure, to track work and to build out our backlog and so on. All right, so that's a topic. If you're going to stand up an innovation program and you figured out your mission statement, one of the next things to figure out is how you're going to measure something, how you're going to measure success. Because if you don't define success, someone else will define it for you. That's a quote somebody should write down. That's a good one. So I took it upon myself then to define what successful looks like. And ultimately, that series of metrics has worked out pretty well for us. All right, so here's the next thing. How do you know how much a budget, how does a budget work for innovation? How do you decide whether you have this autonomous open checkbook to just try stuff versus nope, every project gets sign off? Like, what's that look like? How do you figure out budget and your autonomy versus oversight? And I kind of tied these two together because, frankly, I started to realize that money and autonomy are pretty linked together. One has to have the other. So budget and autonomy, I came up with this little matrix, and this is what our team uses. I will say that my peer groups, because I said I'm trying to present some of the summative learnings on that, my peer groups were all over the place. All over the place on how they stood up the budget aspect of it. So this is one example, but there are many others, and I'll touch on some of them at the end. So I made a matrix, if you will, of how much time and money I can spend and how much time and money I can take from other people before I have to do certain things. So these lines are essentially thresholds that I can't cross without accomplishing certain things. The bottom left-hand corner, recess time, that's the playground. Up to a certain level of interactions, for us it was about 10 hours. And up to a certain size, for us it was about $10,000. We can do whatever we want. That is, of course, goes back to the superhero quote, with great power comes great responsibility, and that we're measured on overall what was the effectiveness use of our time. So like I should not be chasing down pet insurance because I know Boston Mutual will never have something like that. So there's some, whenever you have autonomy, you have responsibility. But in that autonomy, responsibility recess, I guess you could say, we have that. So we have the privilege to experiment. I get to go to conferences and talk to peers. I get to spend time reading industry magazines to figure out what other people are doing. I get to do that research. I get to try stuff. We get to run experiments. When we start taking too much time, so the left-hand side, that interactions time, when I start burning too many hours from my SMEs, when I've called my underwriting people too many times and asking them what about questions, at a certain point, I have to be able to have the formal ask for time. Say, hey, next week, can you try to budget this amount of time in for this person? It's not terribly formal ask, but it has to happen. And on the right-hand side, going on the bottom across to the right, I don't think it'll shock anyone that by size, I really mean money. That's what we care about, right? How much money did I spend? And for us, that line is $10,000. Before I hit $10,000, Andrew's check will be cash. Like, if I write a check and it's less than $10,000, that'll clear. Woo. If it goes over, I need some co-signers on it. So if I'm going to spend more than that on a single effort, I have to do a pitch, essentially, to leadership that shows I know enough about the topic, or my team, I'm sorry, we know enough about the topic that we think this is the potential market opportunity, this is the likely cost, this is what your more than $10,000 buys you. That still doesn't guarantee things, but at least we have enough level of confidence that we're okay with writing that check. So that's how I get to the right, and that's how I get to the top. In the top right corner is when something's big enough and structured enough that it goes through our normal PMO process. So I do have a partner, peer, if you will, that runs a more traditional project management office. And essentially the goal for a lot of these things that we're doing is to take this bottom left, independent, smaller, research type of thing, and understand it enough that we've got all of that variability and risk taken out through experimentation, and now it's a known thing with a decent rate of return and a decent structure to it. And you can start to see, for those that look at the difference between empiricism and defined process, where eventually we start to get rid of the value of empiricism and more to a defined process. So as we cross that threshold, projects will often be handed off to our EPMO area and go through more of a formalized defined process. So when you think about budgets, when you think about autonomy versus oversight, this in one little picture is kind of where my organization landed for that. It can be different though. I've seen a lot of the organizations that we worked with. I said I give a few other examples. Some are a really, really small standing budget with a lot more pitches. So my pitch is after 10,000, which allows us a decent amount of leeway. So one of my peers was at a much lower threshold, so they were constantly just making pitches that they were putting in front of boards, which is cool. Like, I like that. This is a neat idea. So they would just make pitches, and the ones that were blessed, then they would continue forward with. Other areas I had almost had a blank check because you said innovation to the board of directors, and they got excited and they gave a really big sort of benchmark. So mine, I think, is kind of in the middle there, that what I think is a decent sweet spot for our organization. And that's where we landed for autonomy and budget. Where in the organization? So when you think innovation, some people think operations, continuous improvement. Some people think technology. Some people think investments because you're investing in tech startups. So going back to the mission statement, which one of those aligns with you most? And that should probably determine where you're at in the organization. So for Boston Mutual, here's where we ended up in the organization. We are technically in the IT department, as most of our projects have some sort of technical enablement to them. We do not write a lot of code, but we do some. But more importantly, it's who we partner with. And most of our partnership is with this technology development area where we're integrating new applications. So because we partner closest with them, we report up to the same CIO. Fortunately, one step above our CIO is the person that's in charge of our customer experience area, which is for most people known as operations. So the idea that I am not in operations, I'm not that far away. It's not a completely different area. And then when I've talked about that peer of mine that runs our EPMO area, that's that Vice President Enterprise Project Management Office. So the team exists from a hierarchical standpoint below me. I didn't want to put all the names and boxes out there, then it starts to get pretty cluttered and mess. But essentially what happens we made the decision that it exists here. Now, the thing I'd want to call out is some of the different alternatives, because that's what I learned from my peers. Some of the different alternatives that I saw from some of my peers were organizations that existed almost as a direct report up through leadership. So there's this direct report aspect to leadership, so they were almost their own little bubble on an org chart. Other peers of mine were very product development centric. And when they were product development centric, they were under their product type of area. So whether it was marketing, new business, whether it was just a department called product management or something of that nature. So it kind of depended upon what type of work they were doing. Another peer of mine was very technology oriented and was a department within their IT area. So those are kind of the pros and cons of where you can land, and this really should be driven based on the type of work that you're trying to accomplish. Okay, strategy driver versus strategy enabler is a really fun one for me. Again, the concept here is, does the innovation group figure out what's next for the company, and the company that drives the company, that fundamentally changes who we are? It points our North Star, right? Does that happen from innovation? Or does leadership figure out what direction we're going and then call up the innovation people and say, what can you do to help us in an innovative way get there? Like, who helps set that direction? Really important concept when you're trying to stand up an innovation group. So for Boston Mutual, here's kind of where we landed with this. We've got our traditional PMO, which is very reactive. So reactive being ELT or leadership or whoever is saying, this is the direction we're going, and let's work with our traditional PMO to figure out what projects help us get that way. So by reactive, I mean our project people react to the direction from senior leadership and business stakeholders and so on. So they're really following that strategy enablement. The Innovation Lab kind of has a little bit different angle to that. I will probably not drastically change the strategy and direction from the company, but I do have the freedom to try to figure out things that, while are different from maybe what I'm hearing from leadership, have a general overall alignment. And the great example that I say, Boston Mutual, I described who we are. We're not going to transition into pet insurance. We're not going to transition into being some sort of financial holding company. And we're not going to transition into, like, there's things we're definitely just not going to do. It doesn't fit who we are culturally, organization structure, what we're good at, etc. So the job of the Innovation Lab is to understand what that strategy is, and then within tolerance, impact it. So we'll try to figure out things that maybe impact the direction of the organization and how we can execute them within a range. So my team, we're not going to suggest things that drastically alter strategy. The PMO side of us is straight reactionary, whereas our team has that proactive ability. Okay, so that's the strategy aspect. Oh, I'm sorry. Peer companies that I worked with, Most of them actually were a little more vocal about the idea that they wanted to change the organization, although I haven't really seen the fruits of that. Like the peers at First National Bank says we want to change the organization drastically, but I'm very close with that group, and they haven't really done anything that drastically alters who the company is. So I would say that while they're vocalizing a different strategy, the output is actually pretty comparable to the things that I'm doing. Big things versus continuous improvement. So this is fun. Where on the spectrum is your innovation focus? Are we trying to find the next new product or the next new technology, or are we trying to make some continuous improvements? Both of those are extremely valuable things, but what's your focus? The funny thing about focus is you can't have lots of them. That's how focus works. So where do you want to fall in that spectrum? And here's where we fell for Boston Mutual in the mix that I think is probably pretty good. So this is my roadmap, if you will, of how we want to progress to more radical or disruptive items. I'm not sure if anyone's aware. I told you that the Innovation Lab started in November of 20. Shortly after that formed, in March of 21, this weird thing happened where there was this disease that spread, or a virus that spread throughout the world. I think they call it Corona or COVID, depending upon who you ask, I suppose. And it was a pandemic. That's what they called it, if you read the papers at all over the last 2 years. It was in a couple of articles. So this pandemic, I obviously know people read that. The pandemic changed fundamentally how we had to work. And so my team, for the first year and a half or so, spent an incredibly high portion of our time on incremental changes. So this was helping people understand how to do work paperless and examine process work so that we could reduce redundancies and be more efficient, and technology-like process changes, like where could we put in some Excel macros, pivot tables, stuff like that for things that are pretty manual. What existing technology do we have that other people aren't using, right? So my team spent most of our time in that bottom left corner of this roadmap in that incremental space. And I will say I'm incredibly proud of the results that we had. They were great. It helped the company through an incredibly difficult time. But most of those projects were things that everyone on this call would yawn about. It's not exciting, but it's low risk, low reward, meaning that if my team picked up the thing, we've got, like myself, Six Sigma black belt, some of the others are, we're going to figure it out. We're going to make some process improvements. It'll be fine. So we did that. And that worked really well. The low risk, low reward is, I know that if I invest some time, I can improve your process. But now that we are mostly, knock on wood, I don't want to be the person that ruins it, I suppose, don't jinx us. But now that we're mostly out of the pandemic, I'd like to move from those reactionary, immediate, help the company things down the road a little bit. We're starting to do that. So that's where we play in the substantial space. And here's where I say, company, I don't know exactly how we're going to solve this thing, but I think we can. And I think we can figure it out. There's a more risk to this in that I don't know what the end result is, and I don't know the answer. But there's a bigger reward too. So an example in this space will be that we've digitized a lot of our forms. The insurance industry is extremely highly regulated, so trying to accept digital signatures has been big hurdles for the insurance industry, especially older carriers that are a little bit lagging in technology. So we've decided we were going to make a lot of our forms web-based forms. And I know that's feasible, right? Everyone on this call has done a web-based form with an electronic signature, so there is a way. I just don't know the right way, and I don't know how we're going to get there. So there's some risk to it. And in fact, we had to do that experimentation through a bunch of different things. Our website's on WordPress. What WordPress plugins can we use? That didn't work so well. Okay, what sort of digital forms are there that are more commercial but are similar to like a Google form but a commercial version? Tried a couple of things. Not really. Well, all right, DocuSign's getting incredibly popular. Well, that's really good for the signature aspect, but not a web-based form. That didn't work. Finally, we landed on a program called Adobe Sign, which allowed us to do embedded URLs that we could put in our web page that hit all the compliance stuff. Bingo, bango, we got it figured out, right? We got it figured out. We've got a bunch of forms now that are all digitized. I realize that this is still somewhat of a yawn innovation because, like I said, everyone's done it, but it was very innovative for Boston Mutual. So that was the thing that had some risk. I didn't know what the answer was when we picked it up. Finally is where we're starting to get exciting, and that's this radical or disruptive space where it's probably not going to work. But we've talked to, so an example here to try to add some color commentary for this, the insurance industry is perpetually in a state of commodity-based products. So for the people that are on this call, if you think about your employer and how they give you a guaranteed issue life insurance product, and you know that if you pass, your spouse gets 1x of your salary, or whoever your beneficiary is, whatever it is. Now tell me who that company is. People don't really know. That's okay. Like, I wouldn't know if I wasn't in insurance. I wouldn't know. It's just a thing you get. So we've got a commodity-based product, and how do you break that commodity mold? Because in a commodity sort of environment, it's always economies of scale win. And like I said, we're a small insurance company. So we've looked at partnership products that will allow us to break that commodity mold. One being a product that allows you to plan better for your time of passing. And it kind of becomes a digital folder for all your important stuff that you would hand off to someone when you pass. I've done a few deaths recently, like administered a few deaths for family members. I work in the industry. It was easy for me to do compared to others, but I recognize how hard it was. And more importantly, when was the last time you got a bunch of those things physically in the mail? Like, they're going away. So this product, I see a value prop for it, but also I recognize who's going to buy it. Like, it's a tough sell for that product as a standalone. Do you want to buy a folder for when you die? That doesn't sound like a fun way to spend money. Or to organize it, come on. Like, even though I can recognize that it's a value add opportunity, it's hard as an individual product. Now, frame it as an ancillary benefit that we give away for free. I saw my warning there. Don't worry, this is the last slide. So frame it as the last slide. Frame it as an ancillary benefit that we give away for free. And now all of a sudden, that person that doesn't even know who their insurance carrier is being heard the comments of, we care about you, we want to help you in your family's time of need when you pass. So here's a benefit that we're providing, and it's this end-of-life planning type of documentation. Now all of a sudden, we broke that commodity basis. That's a radical or disruptive thing. That's the type of thing that we want to move directionally towards. So other organizations that we talked to were big enough that they had splits where they had continuous improvement teams. This is the ASQ, so you're really familiar with that type of model. You have a lean center of excellence, you have a continuous improvement arm, whatever, and then innovation was a little bit farther down the path. We've had to be a little more full encompassing as a smaller company. Ta-da! I was right. It was my last slide. So that 8-minute warning that you gave me was about perfect. So I will go ahead and stop sharing screen. Confirm stop sharing it.
You are absolutely perfect, Mr. Sherwood. So let us open it up to Q&A from our wonderful leaders and attendees this evening. What is on your mind with regard to corporate innovation and strategic decision points for Andrew?
Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot to end with jazz hands.
There we go, very awesome. Yes, there we go. Okay, so how about while we're waiting for one to come in, how about if we ask, Andrew, if you had one thing that you learned from your takeaways, not to give away the store, but something that's really interesting that you're still noodling on, right? That may perhaps a process or a technology or a finding that you just haven't had a chance to really incubate yet. Might there be something on your radar?
Yeah, so the biggest thing if my learning was, I wish I would have accelerated this process. So the idea that I needed to pick and make some strategic decisions, these slides are the culmination of like a year and a half of twisting and turning and trying to bend and not having good direction. And I just really wish I would have been more intentional at the beginning of understanding these were true decisions that would drastically impact how the organization moved forward. I think my biggest takeaway from this is and this is the value that I'm trying to bring. Like, this is why I would say, yeah, I'll do a talk. I'll tell you what, if somebody's going to do what I just did, they can do it way better by thinking through these 6 things first instead of trying to do them while they run over the course of a year and a half. So accelerating that learning and decisioning process, even if you iterate on it, is going to be so much better than trying to figure these things and define these things out as you go. which is the route that myself and ultimately a lot of my peers that I'm trying to read out for went through as well. So that's why I thought there was value in the conversation. If anyone on this call is spinning up some sort of innovation group or is having trouble with trying to gain traction, sitting down with a pen and paper and some thought, or a keyboard, I guess nobody really uses a pen anymore. Anyway, putting some intentionality into these types of topics is going to gain you traction so much faster than I had.
Thank you, Andrew. So I guess the next question would be, when you think about memorializing what your effort and what you're doing, do you have a playbook? Do you have some other way to kind of promulgate this throughout the organization other than for your team that's in an innovation lab?
So you kind of twisted me a little bit at the end. For the innovation lab, absolutely. The innovation lab, I've built an operating guide, which is like a loose version of a handbook, because I don't want to be prescriptive. That stifles innovation. So I'm trying to find the right spot on the spectrum of helpful and guiding without being defining and prescriptive. So that's kind of where I'm at with my operating guide, and it talks through how we can handle a lot of these things. From a organization, like more, not my team, but the org, I just get out there a lot. So I'm constantly road showing, if you will, to different departments on what we do and getting input and trying to clarify that. So that one's a little more organic. Part of that happens with the sprint review when we're actually showing that product every Thursday. So we get to put stuff out there in front of people. Instead of a PowerPoint, it's like, here's the new web page that we built, or here's the new form that we made, or whatever that looks like. And that really helps, to your word, propagate that concept out more.
So really it's talking to your stakeholders, showing them innovation in action, letting them be your spark, if you will, in various portions of the organization. What would, if you had to advise our listeners on, as they were thinking about standing up an innovation lab, what might be one thing that you would say really helped you hit it out of the park within your organization?
Yeah. The easy answer when people want to form an innovation group is that they'll want to say, I want to spread a culture of innovation. And I came out of the gate saying the same thing. I said, I want to spread a culture of innovation. I want to make Boston Mutual innovative from the inside out. I want to spread that culture. And when I walked around talking about that, people loved it, loved hearing that. But it was hard to gain traction with. Like, it was really hard to say, like, when I say I want to change the culture, like, how do you turn that into action items? It's really difficult to do. It's difficult to accomplish with success. So the pivot that we had, and part of what you, like why I said some of these decisions were evolution oriented, was the idea that I said, no, we're going to make an innovative thing, and then we're going to plant that into the organization. And by doing that and bringing examples in, when we bring those examples in, when we plant those seeds with the organization, that's how we're going to change culture. Not by saying be innovative or teaching people tricks. It's by doing a thing and then planting that idea back in the business. And when we did that, now we've sparked the idea of what can you do. So now we're starting to get more traction culture-wise. But we were much better off by having actionable examples than we were trying to prop up culture.
Understand completely. Yeah, so, with that in mind, what about your stakeholders who hear about your innovation lab and hear about, really get to experience the creations and designs that come from that? How do they get more involved? What's their role in bringing ideas or feedback or even personnel back into the innovation lab?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we operate in an agile model. So we're very close to our stakeholders. When we say we want to work on this thing, hey, stakeholder, here's this idea that we've got. We're working with them in a pseudo-SME user type of capacity, and it has that regular cadence, like with the sprint review where we're showing them done work and we're saying, is this what you mean? Do you think this is valuable to your stakeholders? So we engage them pretty heavily throughout the product or project development process.
Well, that is fantastic. So, Andrew, we are on the hour right now, so I want to say thank you so much for Mr. Andrew Sherwood, Strategic Decision Points for Corporate Innovation. We are so happy that you joined us tonight to be our guest speaker, and we wish you much success. people on the line and who will be listening to the recording later, we ask that you follow up with Andrew. His information will be posted in our ASQ Innovation TC My ASQ discussion area so that you can reach to him and be able to have your Innovation Lab questions answered. I'm going to show the screen for just a moment and invite each of you to our next webinar session, which will be the Story of Innovation on May 25th at 7 p.m. with Miss Robin Albin. Again, thank you to our wonderful speaker tonight, Andrew, and all of you listeners. We hope you had value, and we hope that the ASQ Innovation TC can continue to be of service to you. Thank you again, Andrew, for your time. Thank you, attendees. We'll post the recording and Andrew's wonderful information up in My ASQ ASAP. ASQ Innovation TC wraps for tonight. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you all. You have a good one.
Thank you, you too.